Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, picture this. What actually happens when three of the most iconic and, let's be honest, completely mismatched literary characters in history literally crash into each other on the muddy, morally neutral waters of the Mississippi River? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We are breaking down a brilliantly layered satirical text called The Good Soldier Candide on the Mississippi. It's this wild story that takes wildly different philosophical worldviews, throws them into a blender, and just watches to see which one actually survives the absurdities of 19th-century America.
I mean, it sounds exactly like the setup to a bar joke, right? What happens when a French optimist, an American cynic, and a Czech idiot walk onto a raft? But as you'll see, the author uses this exact absurd premise to hook us into a genuinely profound exploration of human nature. We've got these three distinct travelers trying to somehow navigate military conflicts, brutal institutions, intense religious fervor, and just raw, unfiltered capitalism. And their journey down the river basically becomes this incredible stress test for how we make sense of a totally indifferent universe.
So, here's our river map for today's Explainer. We'll be making 5 stops. First, philosophies on a raft. Then, the absurdity of conflict, the arithmetic of freedom, the business of faith, and finally, first class versus steerage. Let's get moving.
All right, stop number 1, philosophies on a raft. 3 men, 1 river.
Let's meet these mismatched heroes who suddenly find themselves stuck on a handmade wooden raft together. First up, we've got Candide from Westphalia. He is armed with this unshakable, wildly naive optimism from his tutor Dr. Pangloss, literally believing that everything, even total disaster, is for the best. Next up is Huckleberry Finn from Missouri. He's our resident pragmatist and cynic. His worldview is basically just adults are liars and society is cruel. And finally, we have Josef Švejk from Bohemia, a soldier whose entire philosophy consists of such enthusiastic, literal-minded compliance with authority that it basically loops right back around to sabotage. So these 3 totally distinct lenses are about to be put to the ultimate test.
Moving on down the river to section 2, the absurdity of conflict, or as they call it, the button war.
So our trio drifts right into the middle of 2 military encampments that are just itching to slaughter each other. You've got the Blue Army fighting for freedom and justice against the so-called tyranny of the enemy army. But get this, when Huck points out that they look exactly the same, the lieutenant gets furious. He corrects him, saying, no, one side has red trim and brass buttons, the other has crimson trim and bronze buttons. It's just hilarious. The text uses this to completely skewer arbitrary borders and performative nationalism. They are entirely identical, yet entirely willing to kill each other over minor aesthetic differences.
And then we get this incredible moment with a totally disillusioned officer, Captain Grimwood. He lays out the gritty, cynical reality behind all these lofty ideals. It turns out a drunk bureaucrat in the capital basically drew a line on a map, his pen wobbled, and because diplomats couldn't agree on which side of the wobble was correct, armies were sent to die. It's such a stark juxtaposition, and it completely shatters Candide's naive belief that wars refine nations or somehow serve a grand benevolent design.
But you know what the ultimate punchline to this whole button war is? The total casualty count. 3. Exactly 3 human casualties after all that patriotic grandstanding and shooting. And the kicker? 0 were from actual combat. 1 guy died from dysentery and 2 from a collapsed tent. It is an absolute masterpiece of inefficient combat, exposing just the sheer, utter absurdity of the whole conflict.
Which brings us to section 3, the arithmetic of freedom, morality on the river.
Now, the river isn't all just absurd military mix-ups. It offers some real, profound moral horror. Our guys drift directly into a slave auction, and Candide, bless him, tries to literally apply his philosophical equations to this brutal reality. He steps off the raft and tries to buy an enslaved mother and child's freedom using a single thaler coin, a button, and a dried pea. He's totally relying on his defunct theory that slavery is just some unfortunate historical institution. This scene perfectly contrasts Candide's useless optimism against the brutal, unforgiving laws of 19th-century America. I mean, you can't negotiate with a violent systemic machine using a button and a pea.
Thankfully, our guys are yanked out of there by 2 Underground Railroad conductors, Mark and Mary. And man, Mary gives Candide a massive reality check here. She totally shatters his illusions about noble, enlightened virtue. She straight up tells him she doesn't free people out of philosophical nobility. She does it out of spite. She hates slavers, and making them lose money makes her happy.
Mark and Mary show them that surviving and actually helping people isn't about some grand sweeping theory. It's about localized, highly imperfect action, like you hide runaways under fish tarps at midnight. And my favorite detail, when a patrol boat rolls up, it's actually Švejk's absurd, perfectly timed fake drunken snoring that convinces the patrol to just leave them alone. So the takeaway here is that ridiculous, localized action actually saves lives when grand, universal philosophies fail completely. You just move 50 miles north, and you accept that happy endings are never guaranteed.
All right, moving right along to Section 4, the business of faith, down at Prosperity Landing.
So, after leaving Mark and Mary, the raft hits Prosperity Landing, and they run smack into Reverend Obadiah Smythe. This guy is a revival preacher just screaming to a crowd about hellfire. But really, he's operating on a brilliantly efficient business model. Step 1, create a terrifying fear of damnation. Step 2, offer hope, salvation, and a tight-knit community to a struggling frontier town. And Step 3, collect a minimum 15% commission, or, land deeds for your troubles. Smythe is actually totally transparent with our heroes in private. He knows he's selling a useful fiction to people who just desperately need comfort in a really harsh world. Now, Candide tries to step in and challenge the Reverend using pure logic, which, as you can guess, goes over terribly. The crowd turns on him. But then, and this is brilliant, Švejk steps up. He drops this genius paradox that just completely derails the town's heated theological debate. He asks, if God already knows what he's going to do, is he bound by his own foreknowledge? And therefore, does God actually have free will? Švejk basically suggests that maybe God is just as confused by the universe as we are, just improvising as he goes. It is such a hilarious theological curveball.
Things completely spiral when a rival institutional pastor shows up to claim he has the monopoly on truth, and they just end up in a massive shouting match. Švejk totally nails it here. What they're watching is basically sincere nonsense in fierce competition with insincere nonsense. Candide finally gets it. Arguing over whose invisible friend is correct while actual people suffer is just a huge distraction. They discover that honest confusion is vastly superior to dishonest certainty.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, First Class versus Steerage.
So for this last leg, our trio actually boards the steamboat Eternal Providence, and it is the perfect floating microcosm of 19th-century capitalism. Through some fast-talking lies by a con woman named Belle, they sneak up into first class. And wow, the contrast on this boat is jarring. Up top in first class, it's all bolted-down crystal and performative lies filled with people who firmly believe that exploiting others is just basic economics. But below deck, down in steerage, that's where you find functional truth. Raw timber, terrible bread that barely keeps you alive, and people surviving purely on shared work. The text makes this really sharp point. Civilization on this boat only functions if everyone agrees to lie about the exact same things.
Up in first class during this ultra-fancy dinner, there's an industrialist named Whitman, and he's literally boasting that paying immigrant workers barely enough to survive is the absolute genius of the American system, capital directing labor. While Huck is having none of it. He directly challenges the guy, completely shattering the polite illusion of first class by calling it exactly what it is, theft. When profit is made entirely off the backs of people who risk starvation, and that profit is legally protected by the wealthy, that's not a natural law, it's just a rigged game.
Totally disgusted by the dining room, Huck wanders back down to steerage and meets Tom Carpenter, an ironworker. And Tom lays out the grim reality lurking just beneath that gilded, first-class surface of progress. He tells Huck, rich use money, poor use work. Both use lies when necessary. The people down in steerage aren't plotting some grand, sweeping revolution. They are simply trying to survive a system that was specifically designed against them.
Through all these wild, chaotic stops, the ultimate lesson of the Mississippi River really starts to shine through, and it's this. The river simply doesn't care. It does not care about the button war, it doesn't care about your philosophical debates, and it sure doesn't care about your steamboat ticket class. It is just a wide, wet, and morally neutral reality that simply washes away human illusions of control, grand designs, and perfect systems.
Which finally brings Candide to this profound realization. He actually abandons his whole grand, universal theory that this is the best of all possible worlds. He realizes Mark, the Underground Railroad conductor, was right. The world is just way too big to fix all at once. The absolute best you can do is keep your raft floating and help who you can when you can. Localized, imperfect good, even if it's driven by spite or sheer luck, is vastly better than grand theories that practically do nothing.
And honestly, this completely nails the core message of the text. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on as you navigate your own waters.
Are you trying to fix the whole entire world with some perfect philosophy? Or are you just focusing on keeping your raft floating, doing the good that's right in front of you in an indifferent universe? Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next explainer.